Good morning, everyone. I now call the Energy and Climate Finance and Policy Committee meeting to order, and we'll begin by taking the roll.
Chair Long.
Present.
Vice Chair Acom.
Present.
Minority Leader Straczynski.
Present.
Representative Bierman. Representative Bierman. Representative Bowe. Representative Christensen.
Present.
Representative Franzen. Representative Gruenhagen.
Present.
Representative Hollins. Representative Hornstein.
Present.
Representative Igo.
Present.
Representative Lee.
Lee present.
Representative Lippert.
Present.
Representative Listlegard.
Listlegard present.
Representative Mecklin.
Present.
Representative Munson.
Munson present.
Representative Stephenson.
Present.
And Representative Bowe.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, members, for joining us this morning. We have two items of business for today. First, we will be walking through our budget agreement that we have come to with the Senate. And we had a very productive conference committee before we broke and went into working groups. And so a number of these provisions were adopted in the conference committee before our session adjournment date, but we did come to a few other agreements in our working group that we will be walking through today. And I just want to start by thanking the members of our conference committee and our working group for their participation and hard work in getting to this point. We have some great provisions in the bill, and I'm really proud of the work we were able to do, and that I think we worked really well together as a team and worked well with the Senate. So I will turn it over to our staff. I don't know if Mr. Elef or Ms. Beckel are going to start. Ms. Beckel, I believe, for the spreadsheet. Why don't we begin with you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. So here is the Commerce and Energy Finance spreadsheet. So this is now coded as House File 6 for the 2021 first special session. Because I did go through the entirety of the spreadsheet this morning in Commerce with all the detail, I will truncate this presentation just a little bit to focus purely on the climate and energy items. Now, the spreadsheet you're seeing here is also a shortened version. It does not show all the columns for base, governor, House, and Senate. You can find that spreadsheet online on the committee website. But just for ease of viewing, I'm going to be using this version. So the revenue that you see starting on line 14 here, those concern the commerce part of the agreement. So I'll move down to the assessment authority. The Department of Commerce Energy Resources Division and the Public Utilities Commission are allowed to assess for costs they incur. So this is just the assessment authority, the savings back to the state. So for the Natural Gas Innovation Act, the Department of Commerce is allowed to assess back $378,000 over the biennium. And the the Public Utilities Commission is allowed to assess back $224,000 over the biennium, and those are on lines 24 and 25. Moving down to line 36, the PUC has an operating increase, and so this is the assessment back to the state. That's a total of $689,000 in the first biennium and $818,000 in the second biennium. Line 37 shows the commerce operating increase assessment, and below that is another commerce operating increase assessment for energy regulation and planning. And so those come in at $244,000. I apologize if you're hearing my dog in the background. He is suffering intestinal distress, it appears. 244,000 in the first biennium and 57,000 in the second biennium. Line 39 shows the telecommunications increase assessment on lines of 69,000 in the first biennium and 86,000 in the second biennium. The overall impact of the commerce and energy bill combined is an increase of 16.838 million in general fund spending and an increase in 8.566 million in general fund spending in the tails. Moving down to Article 1, this is primarily commerce appropriations, not as much the energy side of appropriations. So we'll move down to, here we go, this page. So starting on line 142, I show the Energy Resources Division. On line 147, the Energy Resources Division receives an operating increase of 244,000 in the first biennium and 298,000 in the second. Line 149, they receive an increase for their energy regulation and planning of 57,000 in the first biennium and 76,000 in the second biennium. Line 153, solar on schools is appropriated 8 million from the general fund in fiscal year 2022 only. Line 154, solar on colleges and universities is appropriated 1.242 million in fiscal year 2022, nothing in 23, and then 1.138 million in fiscal year 2024. Line 156, you can see the appropriations for the Natural Gas Innovation Act that I covered the assessments for earlier. And so that's 189,000 per year. And so that nets to zero. On line 165, I show the Utility Grid Reliability Assessment Extension. This was extended for 1 year, and so there will be expenditures of 500,000 from the Special Revenue Fund each year in the first biennium only. Line 166, I show expenditures for the Minnesota Efficient Technology Accelerator, or META, and that's 3.44 million each year in the first biennium, and 6.02 million each year in the tails. Line 169 and 170 show the assessment authority for that special revenue fund spending that I just went over. So it's the same amounts of assessment revenue back to the state, to the special revenue fund. Line 176, I show the Petroleum Tank Release Compensation Board's appropriations from the Petroleum Tank Release Compensation Fund. This did originally have a sunset. So the sunset was removed in the language. And so therefore we're showing the 1.056 million each year that would otherwise not have been there. And so that's why we're seeing the change of 1.056 million in the first biennium, showing 23 being reinstated, and then the change of 2.112 million in the second biennium. Line 179 shows the landfill bond prepayment. So that is $100,000 in fiscal year 2022 only. Commerce, Article 9 is a commerce item, as is the MMB appropriation and the Department of Health appropriation. The Public Utilities Commission receives an operating increase of 689,000 over the first biennium and an operating increase of 818,000 over the tails, and that again nets to zero. We mentioned that at the top. Line 203 shows the Natural Gas Innovation Act appropriations to the PUC. Again, we mentioned it before because this is accessible. So it's 112,000 appropriated each year, but it nets to zero. Let's see, on line 216, we show the Community Planning Energy Transition Office. This is funded at 170,000 in the first year and 350,000 in the following years, for a total of 520,000 in the first biennium and 700,000 in the second biennium. The Department of Education is a commerce item. And then these items here did not make it into the final bill. If you're looking at the full spreadsheet, you can see those in the House position. This is just a brief fund overview of the Petroleum Tanker Lease Compensation Fund. Again, you can see the values for extending it 1 year for 22-23 because it's just reinstated for 23, and then the values for reinstating it for the full 2 years here. Onto the Renewable Development Account. So this is in Article 2 of the bill. The first department is the Department of Employment and Economic Development. I am showing on line 280 the Community Energy Transition Grants from the 2020 session, Chapter 118. And so there's a carryover. There's a funds appropriated of 1 million in fiscal year 2022. So that's why it's not 8 million here, as you might see in the bill if you're following along. However, you can see the change item is 8 million. On line 283, I show the North Minneapolis Clean Energy Training Center appropriation, 2.5 million in fiscal year 2022 only. Line 284 is the Mountain Iron Solar Plant expansion, 5.5 million in fiscal year 2022 only. Then we move to the Commerce Department. The Commerce Department has a few items from the Renewable Development account that are in the base. So you can see the Made in Minnesota administration, the third-party evaluator, and the Prairie Island spending. That is no change from the February forecast, but is in there just to show spending. Line 297 is new. The agricultural weather study is funded at $583,000 in the first year only. Line 298 shows the St. Thomas microgrid project. That is funded at 2.4 million in fiscal year 22, 1.2 million in fiscal year 23, 1 million in fiscal year 24, and 400,000 in fiscal year 2025. You can see there's some asterisks here. That's to indicate that there is spending of 400,000 for this project in fiscal year 2026 as well. Line 299 is solar on community colleges and universities. This is funded at 1.242 million in the first year, and then 1.138 million in fiscal year 2024. This matches the funding that was provided in the general fund appropriations. Line 324 is the solar awards extension. So nothing in the current biennium, but then it's extended through years 2024 and 2025. Line 325 is the solar on schools renewable development account. This is not an appropriation, but instruction to be withheld by Xcel Energy. So it's still, we show it as a revenue reduction. And so that's 8 million in fiscal year 2022 only. And so that's a matching amount for the general fund appropriation as well. Line 334 is the University of Minnesota Ammonia Research Project. That's funded at 10 million in fiscal year 2022 only. Line 341 shows the State Building Energy Conservation Revolving Loan Fund appropriation to the Department of Administration. That's 5 million in fiscal year 2022 only. 342 shows the State Building Revolving Loan Fund admin. That's 219,000 in the first year, 88,000 in the second year, and then 90,000 in 24 and 92,000 in 25. Line 343 shows the Construction Materials and Environmental Impact Study, which is funded at 125,000 in fiscal year 2022 only. And these items are items that were in the House provisions but did not make it into the final bill. And that completes the spreadsheet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Beckel. We'll turn it over to Mr. Eliff now, and then we will stand for questions. So, Mr. Eliff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be reviewing Article 8 of House File 6, which begins on page 98. And the first two sections establish a revolving loan program under the overview of the Department of Administration to be used by state buildings that are pursuing energy conservation projects. Section 1 establishes the account, and Section 2 describes the operation of the program. Section 3 on page 100 also establishes a new account, the closed landfill solar redevelopment and reuse account, which is established in the remediation fund. This is an account that's tied to a pilot project that's funded elsewhere in the bill, the Anoka Ramsey landfill, which has a utility leasing land on a closed landfill to install solar energy generating systems, and will pay to rent that land to the Pollution Control Agency. And it's this account where those payments will be deposited. At the bottom of page 100, Section 5 extends the Xcel Energy's Solar Rewards program out to 2024 with $5 million in 2023 and $5 million in 2024. Section 6 at the top of page 102 and also sections 7 and 8 following are for a new program, the Energy Transition Office, which is established to address economic dislocations that impacted workers and communities experience when electric energy generating plants are retired. Section 6 sets up the duties of the office. Section 7 establishes an advisory committee that's made up of legislative and non-legislative members. And the advisory committee is to develop a statewide energy transition plan, which is described in Section 8, beginning on page 106. On page 107, starting with Section 9 and extending to Section 115, is language that amends the cold weather rule that's in the statutes. The cold weather rule establishes that energy customers cannot be disconnected during the winter months, provided that they have entered into a payment agreement with their utility or making timely payments under that agreement. What this bill does is extend the cold weather rule period by starting it 2 weeks early and ending it 2 weeks later. So it would now extend from April 1st through April 30th. It also, for electric cooperatives and municipal utilities, allows them to disconnect customers remotely using advanced metering infrastructure. And Section 15, on page 111, requires that utilities share disconnection information data with the Department of Commerce. Section 16 on page 112 strikes language actually on page 113 requiring reports, because that program essentially ended at the end of 2020, so no additional reports are necessary. Section 17, beginning on page 113, is a new program that allows a nonprofit organization to file a proposal with the Commissioner of Commerce for a program to work with technology manufacturers to improve the efficiency and performance of their products, and also work with equipment installers and other actors in the technology supply chain to accelerate the development of products that will save Minnesota consumers energy. And this program is funded by mandatory contributions from both electric and natural gas utilities. On page 116, section 18 strikes language requiring reports from the Public Utilities Commission on rate decoupling programs. Section 19, in the middle of that page, requires utilities in their integrated resource plans to include a narrative that speaks to the efforts of the utility to develop a plan to minimize any dislocations that workers may suffer as a result of upcoming facility plan retirements. Section 20 on page 117 is a long section. It extends all the way to page 128. This is a new program, the Natural Gas Utility Innovation Plans, which allow natural gas utilities to file proposals with the Public Utilities Commission to use innovative resources in addition to conventional natural gas to meet the needs of their customers, including biogas, renewable natural gas, carbon capture, strategic electrification, and other resources. The program describes what needs to be in the application that utilities file with the commission, how the commission evaluates those programs, and also includes cost caps in terms of the amount of cost recovery that can be obtained by utilities for this program. Turning to section 21 on page 129, this is also a part of the Natural Gas Innovation Act. It requires the Public Utilities Commission to develop frameworks to be used to compare the life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions from the various new natural gas innovative resources, and also calls on the commission to develop a cost benefit framework to be able to analyze the costs and benefits of the innovation programs. On page 130, section 22 allows the Commerce Department to assess for its efforts at assessing energy grid reliability at state, regional, and national levels. And the expiration date for that subdivision is extended to 2023. It also requires the Commerce Department to submit a written report to the legislature regarding its efforts on assessing energy grid reliability. At the very bottom of page 130 is the First Solar for Schools program, which provides financial assistance to schools to install solar energy systems on their buildings up to 40 kW or 120% of their energy usage. One thing that's changed since this bill went through committee is that in addition to K-12 schools, schools that are part of the state college system and university system are eligible to receive this financial assistance as well. Section 24 on page 134 is a Solar for Schools program that pertains specifically to the Excel electric service area. At the bottom of page 136, section 25 is the actual changes made on page 137. And this is the cancellation of another report that the PUC is required to do regarding variances for setback requirements for wind systems that are adjacent to outdoor recreational systems. Also on page 137 is section 26, which requires new wind projects that receive permits or permit amendments after this coming July to install turbine lighting systems. These are systems that turn lights on when airplanes are approaching the turbines and automatically turn them off when they've passed over that area. These systems have to be approved by the Federal Aviation Administration, and there are exemptions that can be provided if these systems are technically infeasible or impose a significant financial burden on the wind system. At the top of page 139, section 27 requires the Public Utilities Commission to initiate a proceeding by this August to examine whether changes are needed to natural gas regulatory policies in order to facilitate the achievement of the state's greenhouse gas emission goals. Section 28 requires the Department of Administration to issue an open request for proposals for a new statewide photovoltaic master contract by February 1st, 2022, so that additional solar developers can participate in that program. Section 29 contains the agricultural weather study that Ms. Beckel referred to. It's a study done by the University of Minnesota to generate various weather parameters through the end of the century statewide and to areas as small as 3 square miles in size. Section 30 on page 140 establishes a training center for technical clean energy careers in the areas of renewable energy, energy efficiency, energy storage, and infrastructure for electric vehicle charging systems. And finally, on page 141 is section 31, which requires the Commissioner of Administration to contract with the University of Minnesota's Center for Sustainable Building Research to examine the feasibility and the economic costs and environmental costs and benefits of requiring builders of state buildings or vendors of particular construction projects like concrete, metal, and wood whether in their bids, they should include environmental impact statements of regarding those materials. A report is due to the legislature on the feasibility and costs of that by February 2022. And that concludes the policy review, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Eliff. I hope members saw how much good provisions there are in this bill. I think it's something that we can all be really proud of. And I'd like to thank in particular the members of this committee who worked really hard on a lot of these provisions. Representative Acom for the Solar in Schools bill, the Efficient Technology Accelerator and the Cold Weather Rule, Representative Listagard for the Buy Clean Study and the Mountain Iron Project, Representative Lippert for the Solar and Landfills provision, Representative Stephenson for the Natural Gas Innovation Act, Representative Christensen for the Energy Transition Office and the Utility Planning for Job Impacts, and Representative Lee for the North Minneapolis Training Center. I think we put a lot of great work in from the committee members here, and that is reflected in the bipartisan agreement that we have today. So with that, I will turn over for questions, and we'll begin with Representative Swazinski.
Thank you, Chair Long. Thank you, members. Just a general question. Obviously, the session didn't end on time, and so the reason these bills are moving forward is part of that process. But just kind of was wondering who was kind of in the room during these negotiations and that sort of thing. Obviously, you probably weren't doing it in a room, but in the Zoom call, or how did that whole process work?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Representative Swazinski. So when we were in session, we did as much as we could without having our budget targets as part of the conference committee. Obviously, that changed when we were out of session. We moved to the working groups. And at that point, it was myself and Representative Stephenson negotiating with Representative Senjum Senator Senjum and Senator Dames. And we certainly did our best to keep the conference committee informed. Representative Swazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there, oftentimes with meetings, there's minutes available. Are there minutes at all with some of those meetings that were held, or things that we could kind of look at from a historical, what was traded for and what was talked about that we could look at?
No, but if you have particular questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Representative Swazinski.
I'll let some other folks ask questions.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, my question would be, how many provisions in this bill, in this omnibus bill, weren't in the Senate or House bills that were passed off the floor? My understanding is at least one of them is in other words, they dropped out of the sky. That's what some people call it, okay? In other words, they weren't vetted through committees. They weren't vetted on the floor of the Senate or the House, but they simply showed up in the omnibus bill. My understanding is the Community College Solar Grant Program was one of them. I would like a list of how many provisions made it into the final bill that weren't in the House or the Senate bill.
Thank you for the question, Representative Gruenhagen. Yes, you highlighted the community college program, which was new. It was a proposal from the Senate, but I wouldn't say that it wasn't at least an evolution of the Solar in Schools program. And in fact, it uses the entire language from the Solar in Schools program. So we're simply adding higher education institutions to the definitions of schools and funding those. Representative Gruenhagen.
So is there anyone that can provide a list of any other provisions that were dropped in that didn't appear in the House or the Senate bill?
Representative Gruenhagen, as far as I know, that's the list. Representative Gruenhagen.
Okay, is there any staff person to check with that would know that?
Sure, Mr. Eliff, am I missing any provisions that were not in the House or the Senate bills?
Mr. Chair, when Representative Gruenhagen asked the question, I did a quick run through of the bill, and very quick. And it seemed to me that Section 13 under the cold weather rule is language that appeared after the bill had been through our committee. That's the one that allows the co-ops and munis to disconnect remotely. And also Section 15, also part of the cold weather rule, which requires utilities to share disconnection information with the Department of Commerce. I was also looking at another section here. I wasn't sure if the energy grid reliability assessment had been in the bill when it first passed our committee, Mr. Chair. Maybe you can refresh all our memories on that.
Thank you, Mr. Aliff. Yes, that was in the bill. The Senate did request a study, which was added in committee. And thank you for the reminder on the provisions pertaining to reporting, or rather the remote shutoffs. That was something that had been requested by the co-ops and was negotiated as part of the agreement around ECO, but made it into this bill. Representative Gruenhagen.
Okay, that was a quick assessment. I guess I'd appreciate if he would look it through a little more thoroughly and send us out an email of any other drop from the sky provisions that got into the bill, because those weren't, technically in the House or Senate bill ahead of time, and it's something that we should at least take a look at. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
We can do that. Thank you, Representative Gruenhagen. Well, I'm not seeing further hands, so thank you, members, for the hard work on the bill and for the walkthrough. And so that'll conclude the first part of our hearing for today, and we'll move on to the second part of our hearing, where we're going to be getting presentations on the federal proposals around the American Jobs Plan. And I've asked folks to come present to us today because we likely are not going to meet again until next year. And the American Jobs Plan proposals are some pretty significant energy proposals that are going to have a big impact potentially in energy policy in Minnesota, and thought it would be helpful for members to have an understanding of what those policies might look like as we're working in the interim on energy policies potentially for next session. And we're going to be hearing from 3 speakers, and we'll hear from each of them and then take times for questions. And our first speaker, we are truly honored to have Jeremiah Bauman with us, who's the Deputy Chief of Staff for the U.S. Department of Energy. And I'm really grateful that he was willing to take time out of his busy schedule to join us. And I will turn it over to Mr. Bauman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. It's a delight to see you. It's been a few years. I thought I would just pretty briefly do an overview of the major energy provisions in the American Jobs Plan and take as much time as possible for any questions that the committee members would like to ask. Since there's a lot in that plan and a lot I won't cover in a brief overview, and that way I can best focus on the areas of most interest. First is overall context. It is indeed a comprehensive plan for modernizing infrastructure across the entirety of the economy, really, from more than $600 billion in transportation infrastructure, $50 billion in climate resilience, $111 billion in water infrastructure, covering broadband, our building and housing stock, more than $200 billion for housing and building stock, $100 billion for our public schools, several $100 billion in healthcare infrastructure to take better care of our seniors and others with special needs and help them to age in place. It really, truly is a broad investment in modernizing the foundations of our economy. I, however, am the Deputy Chief of Staff at the Department of Energy, so I will focus just on the energy provisions this morning. And it really does attempt to put in place a comprehensive strategy to build the clean energy economy that will be the foundation we need for the 21st century, both for the kind of sustainable and equitable economic growth, meaning good paying jobs, union jobs, providing for an economic future for energy communities affected by energy transitions away from fossil fuels, and also prioritizing environmental justice and the communities that for far too long have borne the brunt of the impacts of pollution from historic energy practices. The investments outlined in this plan modernize and upgrade our energy systems comprehensively across power sector, transportation sector, our buildings, our manufacturing and industrial sectors, and really do add up to a comprehensive plan to meet all the objectives I just described. And at the same time, tackle the climate crisis with the urgency and ambition it deserves. Because after all, there is no foundation for a 21st century economy if it doesn't build for a zero carbon future. So let me just briefly overview the power, transportation, and building sectors in particular. And if people are interested, I'm happy to go more into the R&D and innovation strategies, as well as manufacturing and industrial strategies that are also critical parts of the president's climate plan. In the power sector, a couple of key pieces to highlight. First of all, a big focus on transmission. In particular, a new $12 billion investment in grants and loans, where financing gaps and barriers in the current fragmented way that our energy system finances transmission are a big reason we aren't getting the transmission investments that we need. Also, a new office at the Department of Energy that would be called the Grid Deployment Authority, whose role is really to centralize in one place a national transmission planning function, a collaboration strategy to work with the states on transmission needs and planning and siting and permitting issues where our technical resources and funding could be helpful. And then to also combine financing tools and authorities to help with that actual build out. In addition to the transmission investment, there are a wide range of investments in actually decarbonizing the power system. So $20 billion in block grants for state and local governments that would be built to support state and local energy policies. So state and local governments that want to make progress in advancing clean energy policies would get DOE support, both to develop and implement those policies, but then also robust funding to just deploy the clean energy enabled by those policies. Everything from distributed generation, community solar, especially projects that are going to benefit low-income communities, communities of color, and communities at risk of being left behind in the industrial or energy transition. But really, strategies for infrastructure and clean energy deployment tailored to each state. In addition, there are demonstration projects for advanced technologies ranging from storage to hydrogen and carbon capture. There's a long-term expansion and extension of tax credits, both the renewable energy tax credits and new energy storage and transmission tax credits, as well as hydrogen and carbon capture tax credits. And then a clean electricity standard that would ensure the whole package adds up to 80% by 2030 on our way to the president's goal of 100% clean electricity by 2035. In the transportation sector, the proposal really is a comprehensive plan to move us down the road quickly to decarbonize our transportation sector, starting with a $174 billion investment to accelerate the electrification of our vehicle fleet. That includes $15 billion to build out a network of 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations, both across communities and in communities, to make sure there's connectivity within communities, as well as along our national highway network, to make sure that people have the confidence that the charging infrastructure is there for them. In addition, there is a program to convert current tax credits for electric vehicles and other zero emissions vehicles too, I should be clear, to point of sale rebates that work better to make sure that these new vehicles that are higher performing and have dramatically lower fuel and maintenance costs are also accessible to families of all income levels, and there's not a barrier on the upfront cost. So a point of sale rebate to reduce the purchase price of that vehicles. In addition, ongoing innovation, including demonstration projects on sustainable biofuels, especially for the aviation and long-haul heavy-duty transportation sectors, where they really could be a critical part of decarbonizing our transportation system as a whole. The last place I'll do a little bit of detail is the building sector. And as I said, happy to go into any other sectors or other parts of the bill where people want to. But when it comes to modernizing and retrofitting and decarbonizing our homes and buildings, there's another comprehensive strategy at play here. Number one, a $17.5 billion investment in the weatherization programs that is, I'm sure all of you know, are largely deployed at the state and local level. Paired with another state and local government block grant program, similarly $13 billion to help advance state and local clean energy and building decarbonization policies, connected with robust funding to support the actual deployment of retrofit and other building decarbonization projects. $10 billion in rebates for residents to acquire new zero carbon appliances or do home retrofits. And then finally, a $27 billion investment to capitalize a clean energy and sustainability accelerator. This is a lot like what many of you have probably heard called a green bank financing program to really focus on low income and other underserved markets where financing tools can help really accelerate building retrofits and distributed energy resources and other technologies and strategies suited to local communities. Why don't I stop there and see what questions people have and what other areas that Mr. Chairman, you or other members of the committee would like to go deeper on.
Thank you so much, Mr. Baumann. I see a number of members with hands up. I have one quick question before I turn to other members. The first is the clean electricity standard that you mentioned. I know that our home state Senator Smith has been working extremely hard on this provision, and we passed a clean electricity standard through the House this year as well. And I was hoping you could describe a little bit what that standard would look like and the importance of it to the overall package.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Yes, Senator Smith has been an absolute hero doing yeoman's work on every possible way to advance a clean energy standard through the U.S. Congress and has a very advanced proposal. The proposal as it currently stands would be a technology neutral zero carbon electricity standard. So it would include, of course, renewable resources and storage, but also carbon capture, hydrogen, advanced nuclear, any strategy that could compete on a zero carbon basis. It would set a national standard and be designed to work for utilities starting from a variety of starting points. As I'm sure you're aware, different parts of the country are in very different places in terms of how far along that decarbonization track they have gone. So it would be designed to work on a regional basis, to work for every utility. And it would be designed really to leave plenty of room for states to craft the compliance pathway for utilities to make sure that every utility in every state can craft the kind of combination of technology pathways and other aspects of clean energy development that are going to work best for that state.
Thank you very much. Representative Swazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Mr. Baumann for joining us here in the state of Minnesota. I appreciate your time and what you do in Washington. Just a couple questions for you, kind of in terms of just solar. It's well known that the Midwest is the breadbasket of America, and quite frankly, the world when it comes to food production. And we kind of have a potential alarming trend here where prime farmland is being used up for the development of solar installations. Does the Biden administration have any plan to help protect prime farmland so that we can also have a cheap, more affordable food source, but also a strong energy economy? And then I have a follow-up to that.
Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, Representative Swazinski, Mr. Chair. That's an excellent question and clearly something that we have to look for. Land use is, of course, primarily in the hands of state and local jurisdictions. So we don't have any sort of particular proposal on how to manage the siting of solar at the local level. I will say that we do want to partner closely with states to make sure that we get this right. We both have to make sure there aren't undue barriers to deploying clean energy so that we are deploying it as rapidly as possible to meet both economic and carbon goals. But we also have to make sure that we're deploying it in places that are appropriate and that the land has to be used to meet multiple goals. And certainly high value soils shouldn't be necessarily put behind other uses. And that's something that we'd be happy to follow up on and partner with our colleagues at the Department of Agriculture to make sure that the right kinds of technical support and other resources are ready to help state governments manage that sort of policy nexus.
Representative Swazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Baumann. I'd be happy to work with you on helping to protect those prime farmlands and with siting anywhere in the country, or especially here in Minnesota. And just a general follow-up as well. I think I've heard estimates that, with kind of the clean energy economy potentially moving forward and a carbon-free standard potentially moving forward, there's going to be a great need for natural resources. And they estimate in one report that we'd have to see the same amount of copper production in the last 500 years in the next 25 years moving into the future if the economy and if the energy system is going to be moving in this direction. Does the Biden administration have a plan on the potential acquisition of those assets, and what commitment does the Biden administration have on the mining of those resources here in the United States, because of our clean ways of mining, but also our slave-free mining processes we have here in the United States?
Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Swazinski. That's an excellent topic, and the Secretary of Energy was in fact just discussing it in front of the U.S. Senate Energy Committee 30 minutes ago. We actually released 2 reports in the last week, one an administration-wide strategy to secure domestic supply chains for critical minerals and critical materials, pursuant to an executive order that President Biden signed at the very beginning of his administration. And then the Department of Energy released a specific supply chain strategy for batteries in particular, which of course also depend a lot on the kinds of critical minerals and metals that you're talking about. Long story short, the view of Secretary of Energy and this administration is that we need a comprehensive strategy. We, first of all, have a number of unconventional sources where we can acquire these materials, ranging from better collection and recycling of electronics products at the end of their life, to actually extracting metals and materials from mine waste, including coal waste, in the process of cleaning up and remediating abandoned mine sites. But we also do need, in particular, expanded processing. We, for materials like lithium, we actually produce a decent amount in the United States, but we don't have any industrial processing. So it's sent abroad, including to China for processing, and then sent back to us. And then at the end of the day, we also will need new production and likely expanded mining in this country. It's of course critical that we get that right when it comes to gold standard environmental regulation and conservation protections, as well as close consultation with local communities, with affected communities, and in particular with tribal nations who have sovereign government to government rights and need to be treated as equal sovereign partners in this process. And to have any true path to sustainable minerals production, which is critical economically, we're going to have to get all of those factors right. And it'll take a comprehensive strategy to have to secure domestic supply chains for those minerals.
Representative Acom.
Oh, I just had one follow-up, Representative Long.
I'm sorry, Representative Swazinski. We have 7 hands up, it looks like, and so I'm going to have to.
I'll just get to it real quick.
Okay.
And just a general question to Mr. Baumann, just on energy costs. We've seen a huge increase at gas at the pumps that's really affecting everyday Americans. And what is the Biden administration's plans on addressing those costs at the base level when it comes to the cost of energy and cost of gas that's coming right out of people's disposable income? Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, Representative Swazinski. Yes, energy costs are, of course, top of mind for the President and the Secretary of Energy, and costs at the pump hit American families like few other costs do on a day-to-day basis. There are, of course, ups and downs, especially as we come out of such a deep and rare form of economic recession. And so we are keeping a very close eye on that. We're certainly looking at any potential supply chain disruptions like what we saw with the Colonial Pipeline, where the Secretary was on calls 4 or 5 times a day, managing that supply disruption and getting that back up and running. And if we find any other places where gas prices are hit in ways that we can directly affect, we will be the first to do so.
Representative Acom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Baumann, for being here today. I think it's really exciting that we have a partner in the federal government on some of these really important issues that matter a lot to our constituents. So thank you for being here and for briefing us on what's going on in Washington, D.C. I have two just really brief questions. You were just talking about the pipeline disruption, and my question is similar to that about transmission. And so are we making, you were talking about investments in transmission, wondering if some of the investments in transmission are going to securing our grid. And then I'll say my other question really quick so that we can be as quick as we can with time. And it's about the block grant process for decarbonizing, and wondering how that's going to look with states, and how that'll look and how we can participate in that. So thank you.
Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Acom. Certainly the security of our transmission grid is of paramount importance, and the Secretary of Energy would be the first to tell you that what we learned from the Colonial Pipeline is just a glimpse of what could come in a variety of sectors of the economy, including our grid. There's a deep vulnerability, and it's going to require an all-hands-on-deck approach to address it. The American Jobs Plan does include several billion specifically in cybersecurity for our grid, as well as in broader resilience. Having actually more transmission and a smarter grid is part of having a more secure grid, because you can minimize local blackouts, whether it's weather or cyber issues. But of course, getting the technology and the cyber investment right is at the foundation of the cybersecurity in particular. We've actually got a new reorganized office and newly prioritized leader in that office leading cybersecurity efforts. So happy to follow up with anything else that can help you with that. On the block grants, the main thing I would say is that the Secretary is particularly interested in supporting state and local governments making as much progress on clean energy as they can, and doing so in a way that is competitive, in the sense that the more progress a state or local jurisdiction wants to make, the more support they would get from the Department of Energy to do so, but with a level playing field, so that states starting from wherever they are at can pursue the strategies that work best for their states. So, I think that means when you're looking at, for example, clean energy, states choose a variety of policies, a variety of different kinds of clean energy standards. Sometimes it's not a legislative standard. Sometimes different agencies have different ways of deploying clean energy. And we want to really work with state and local leaders to design a process that'll support a variety of policies, and then provide resources that really go out and the sort of mantra of Secretary Granholm is deploy, 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 create those jobs and get that clean energy onto the grid as fast as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Baumann. So we have 5 hands up. I'm going to have to limit folks to 1 question each, so we can let Mr. Baumann go and make sure we have time for all of our the last 2 witnesses. Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I got about 6 to 8 questions, but I'll ask just one. Okay, Mr. Baumann, there's a growing number of environmental scientists that say we should be more concerned about methane than about CO2. In fact, they said because our garbage dumps are not being incinerated, 1,000 they're letting off tons of methane, and 1 ton of methane is equal to 25,000 tons of CO2, according to a U.S. Energy report in 2019. Also, methane does much more damage in our atmosphere, and it lasts for over 12 years. Is there anything in the bill that addresses this compared to, the clean energy is not going to be clean at all. It's going to be dirty, but that's besides the point. But just address the methane versus CO2 in the U.S. Energy report. Thank you.
Mr. Baumann.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Representative. Methane is an absolutely critical threat to our climate and our atmosphere. You are right. It is many times more potent than carbon dioxide. It also, though, I would hate to get into the territory of ranking different climate pollutants. Carbon dioxide lasts many, many times longer in the atmosphere. So they both cause plenty of damage, and they are both certainly a crisis that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. The president's proposal does include a variety of strategies for methane. In particular, I would highlight cleaning up the existing natural gas infrastructure, which leaks methane in all sorts of ways, many of which are absolutely cost effective to keep that methane from leaking, so need to be top priority. I should note that the US Senate has also already passed a bill that would reinstate rules to make sure that natural gas companies limit the methane from their pipeline infrastructure that were repealed under the last administration. And the US House is working its way through the process. I believe the committee already acted. The other area I would mention on the methane front is addressing abandoned oil and gas wells and coal mines, all of which are major sources of leaking methane as well, all of which create lots of jobs that are very well skills matched to workers who are displaced in the ups and downs of the oil and gas economy or in the shift from fossil fuels to other energy sources. And it's create economic development in some of those communities as you make those sites more appropriate for other types of development. So there's certainly a lot to be done on the methane front. And you're also right that capturing methane from landfills is another good strategy.
Representative Bierman.
Thank you, Representative Chairman Long, and thanks for being with us today, Mr. Baumann. Really good information this high level. I'm glad to hear weatherization came up in your initial comments, and that's really important up here in this area. I was wondering, with that program, you just talked about jobs. That's what this is about. Weatherization creates a lot of jobs, every state or every county in the state. Question I have is, how is that funding distributed to states? Will it be granted just on a per capita basis, or is there any sort of look at how a state prioritizes that, and can they be incentivized by utilizing more funds for that program to match it at a higher level, please?
Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Bierman. That's a great question, and you are right. Secretary Granholm looks at weatherization and she sees jobs, and jobs that can't be outsourced. It also lowers energy bills for families and businesses. So it's just an all-around big win. I think there's sort of two answers to that. One big tranche of funding would go through the existing weatherization assistance program that has existing formulas for how that goes out to states and counties. And then in addition, there would be block grants that would be more of a competitive in the sense that sort of states that put forward the kind of the best plans for making progress in the building sector would be eligible for more funding, not competitive in the sense that only states would get, some states would get the funding. It would be a sort of competition that we would hope every state would win.
Thank you, Mr. Baumann. Representative Franzen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Baumann, thank you so much for being here today. I have had many concerns on the human rights aspect with the green energy. And so I am wondering here what we can be doing to end the human rights violations. So this is an article from May 12th, 2021, so a month ago. The article is by Solar Power World Online, where the headline says, "No avoiding it now. Soon the top 4 polysilicon manufacturers will be based in China." Now, I don't have to tell you about the concerns that we should all be having, especially this administration, with China, but their human rights violations definitely are real. They are concerning, and we should not, this company, the land of the free, should not be supporting anything to do with China. But the top 10 polysilicon manufacturers for 2020 include number 1, China, number 2, Germany, United States, number 3, China, 4, China, 5, China, 6, China, 7, South Korea, Malaysia, 8, China, 9, United States, 10, China. Then you go into just simply Google polysilicon solar panel with slave labor, brings up all kinds of horrific articles. A dark spot for solar energy industry, forced labor in Xinjiang, addressing forced labor concerns in polysilicon produced in Xinjiang, Chinese solar companies tied to use of forced labor. Biden solar ambitions collide with China labor complaints. Fears over China Muslim forced labor loom over EU solar panel. Solar panel industry pushed to examine supply chain after reports of forced labor. So, Mr. Baumann, as you can see, very concerned here. So I'm just wondering, how are you addressing the human rights issues when it comes to green energy? And to say that we are looking into it or we are transitioning to more manufacturing here in the United States is going to be very impossible when the majority of the polysilicon is found in China.
Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Franson, for that excellent question. This is indeed a serious problem. Secretary Granholm and the President would agree with you that we don't want to be using products from countries that have slave labor or other human rights violations. Moreover, we don't want to be using products that aren't American made if we don't need to be using them. We're going to need to dramatically increase the rate of clean energy deployment in this country to meet the decarbonization goals. And just as importantly, to maximize the economic benefits to American workers and American businesses. And we maximize those benefits if we are making solar, and yes, all the way back to polysilicon in the US. The US did in fact have a polysilicon industry that was much more robust than it is today. And unfortunately, past administrations allowed much of that market to be captured by China and other countries. And this administration is committed to rebuilding a supply chain for the solar industry and other clean energy industries in the US. That includes a $300 billion proposed investment in manufacturing in the small business economy. It includes specific funding to provide loan guarantees and tax credits to new factories or retrofits of older factories to expand clean energy production. And it covers the entire supply chain from polysilicon through ingots and wafers to modules. And we're even looking at how we can best support the tracking and racking systems that should be made out of US steel to support solar panels, whether they're sitting in fields or moving to follow the sun.
Representative Igo.
Thank you, Chair Long, and thank you, Mr. Baumann, for being here. And I just have to say, I mean, listening to your presentation, you've said a lot of things that actually have me pretty excited right now. And I'll start, you talked about carbon sequestration and how that's a priority of the administration. That's super exciting for me. I have a large coal facility in my district that actually powers all of the iron mines, the taconite mines across northeastern Minnesota, which will be, like you've been saying, very vital to the green technology industries that we're moving forward. But at the same time, if we can institute carbon sequestration to that plant, we could keep that coal facility going while keeping a clean environment and keeping those mines going. But additionally, and Representative Franson was already starting to talk about it, when we increase these demands, we're going to have to increase the supply chains for a lot of these critical minerals that you mentioned earlier. If you're not aware, we have those critical minerals in northeastern Minnesota. And I guess my hope and my question is today is I hope that the administration is aware of these projects such as Twin Metals and Polymet that could provide thousands of tons of these critical minerals that we can source safely and responsibly here in northeastern Minnesota to bring the green revolution that this administration is talking about. And because this is sustainability and this is the way we should do things. So I guess my question to you is the administration aware of these projects? And how are you partnering with these groups to make sure that we are doing this the safe way and the right way and not destroying environments around the world by increasing demand like this?
Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Igo. The administration is really taking a whole of government approach to all the issues that you've talked about. So the critical mineral supply chain strategy involved a variety of agencies and departments. Of course, Department of Interior and EPA have much bigger roles than the Department of Energy does on the environmental and sustainability side of how we do critical minerals production. The Department of Energy does look to partnering with industry to figure out where are there additional supports or policies needed. We have, for example, loan guarantee authority that can provide loans to industries to help speed up industrial facilities. And the Secretary actually just told the U.S. Senate Energy Committee that she's having her lawyers look at whether those can already support critical mineral production. And then I would say to your point about carbon capture, it absolutely is part of making sure that every community can be part of the clean energy future. The President's American Jobs Plan includes funding for 10 carbon capture demonstration projects around the country, with a priority focus on communities that either by virtue of energy transition or sort of historic disinvestment are disadvantaged communities as well, to make sure that sort of every community really does have a seat at the table as we build this new economy together.
And last but not least, Representative Lippert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Baumann. Just appreciate your presentation and the vision of the administration too. I just quickly wanted to ask about the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator program and those funds, and what states like Minnesota should be doing to be able to tap into those funds, to be able to make use of them.
Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Lippert. The short answer is the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator should be well positioned to both help fund local and state similar clean energy finance programs or green bank programs. So that is certainly one route into that area for state or local government. But we're also looking at making sure it's set up to provide a variety of strategies. So if there's a state that doesn't have one that is set up, or there's other opportunity beyond the state's own clean energy financing program, there could be, for example, financing that goes directly to portfolios of projects or other financing-based programs, whether that's a multi-state or regional program. So we're hoping there'll be a variety of entry points, would be the short answer.
Well, Mr. Baumann, on behalf of myself and our whole committee, we really are so grateful for you taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend with us today, and for your very substantive and helpful answers. And we just appreciate so much President Biden and the administration's leadership on clean energy and this incredibly visionary, bold proposal. And we wish you all success in the coming months in trying to move these important initiatives forward.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. It's a real delight to be back in Minnesota, even virtually. It's been a long time since I graduated from Rosemont High School.
Well, we welcome you back in person anytime.
I'd love to get there. I hope to soon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Baumann. So we have two more speakers before we wrap up today, and we have asked them to talk about some of the rural energy development programs and initiatives that are a part of the American Jobs Plan proposal. And Ms. Kendall, I believe you have a hard stop. Mr. Pieper, would you be all right if Ms. Kendall went first in the order?
Sure, that's fine, thanks.
Okay. Ms. Kendall, go right ahead.
Thank you very much. It's great to have the opportunity to be here with you today. Chairman Long and committee members, my name is Sarah Kendall, and I'm the Program Director for the Western Organization of Resource Councils, or WORK. WORK is a network of rural community organizations in 7 states in the Northern Rockies and Great Plains, including the Dakotas to your west. I have represented WORK in Washington, D.C. since 1994. I think I had wanted to focus on the issue of rural electric cooperatives in the American Jobs Plan and the federal policy debate that we are having right now. Since rural electrification began in 1936, rural electric cooperatives have been a critical component of rural infrastructure. And as we talk about decarbonization, I think they provide unique opportunities and challenges. Electric co-ops have helped improve the lives of millions of rural Americans, including many members of my organization. Today, as we in rural America face new challenges brought on by climate change, and as we work to rebuild from COVID-19, rural electric cooperatives will once again need to play a critical role in transforming the lives of rural people. Today, electric cooperatives serve 42 million Americans and cover 56% of the country's land mass, making rural electrification one of the most successful social democracy programs in American history. Electric co-ops serve more than 90% of the counties that are federally recognized for persistent poverty, including Native American sovereign nations and African American communities, both of which were disproportionately devastated by COVID-19. I think that others, I think Mr. Piper will talk about the Biden administration's commitments to investing in rural areas, and Mr. Baumann had talked about the commitment to working with and delivering benefits to disadvantaged communities. The Biden administration has actually made a commitment to deliver 40% of climate investments to communities that have been disadvantaged for investments in clean energy, energy efficiency, and other programs. So we see rural electric cooperatives as being positioned to really help the administration deliver on all of these commitments. Even before the pandemic, rural communities were dealing with serious structural problems with their utilities. Reliance on increasingly expensive coal plants combined with little ability to invest in home energy upgrades has caused the burden of energy costs to intensify in many rural electric cooperative service areas. Collectively now, carrying a total debt burden that tops $100 billion, the vast majority of electric cooperatives have been slow to invest in clean energy solutions that can reduce costs for rural people, in part because they're saddled with legacy debt. And the catch-22 that we see is even though legacy plants are often more expensive to operate than new clean energy sources, they can be even more expensive to retire. Since the beginning of the pandemic, my organization has been working alongside a national coalition that includes representatives from Minnesota to put forth ideas for federal action that would provide the resources that cooperatives in rural communities need. Together, the Rural Power Coalition has put forward a 7-point platform to help foster clean energy transition, equitable deployment of beneficial electrification, and rural broadband build-out. Our full proposal can be found online at ruralpower.us, and it addresses many of the short-term crises brought on by the pandemic, as well as longer-term issues that cooperatives have been facing. Several of the planks of our coalition's platform align with the priority of co-ops across the country, as well as National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Our coalition wants what co-ops and member owners want. We want local, affordable, reliable, efficient, clean, and democratic power. We want cooperatives to have the resources at their disposal to transform rural communities at the same scale they did in the 1930s. And that's why the center point of our platform is a $100 billion investment in the rural electric system that would mimic the Paycheck Protection Program. The PPP deployed $1 trillion to small businesses and successfully kept large parts of our economy afloat through the pandemic. Through a very similar loan forgiveness program, the rural electric system could be permanently improved, modernized, and decarbonized for a fraction of the cost of the PPP. The Biden administration agrees that rural infrastructure must be a critical investment as we emerge from the pandemic, and rural electric cooperatives are specifically named by the administration as a priority in the American Jobs Plan's rural fact sheet, which identified the need to transition rural co-ops to clean energy. It says, as part of a nationwide plan to modernize our power infrastructure, the president's proposal will invest $10 billion to partner with rural electric cooperatives that are eager to benefit from low-cost clean energy by retiring expensive and polluting plants and replacing them with modern systems, improving public health and supporting good jobs at the same time. While this proposed funding level is smaller than our coalition's proposed $100 billion, it shows that investment in rural electric systems is a growing priority in Washington that is needed to meet climate, rural investment, and Justice 40 goals. In my 27 years of experience working in Washington, I feel that we are at a unique political moment because of the pandemic and the climate crisis, an unprecedented moment of opportunity to propose bold actions that address some of the major challenges our communities and our country are facing. To succeed, we need leaders like yourselves in state legislatures and rural electric cooperatives to recognize this moment of opportunity, and rather than recommitting to expensive coal plants, to instead ask political leaders in Washington for the investment we need to transform our rural electric system that will allow cooperatives to become the cleanest utilities in the country. So we're looking forward to the ongoing conversations around opportunities for rural electric cooperatives in the American Jobs Plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us, Ms. Kendall. And our final speaker will be Tony Pipa, who is with the Brookings Institution as a senior fellow. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Pipa. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having me. As you said, I'm Tony Pipa. I'm a senior fellow in the Center for Sustainable Development at the Brookings Institution, and I'm pleased here just to comment a little bit on the commitments that the Biden-Harris administration has made to rural communities in particular through the American Jobs Plan. And before I do that, I just want to sort of set the context a little bit, and I'm going to throw up a slide here so that you can see sort of the context in which a commitment to rural really is happening. This is from a report and an analysis that we did last year that looked at all the resources for economic and community development that are available to rural communities from the federal government. And as one person who was interviewing me described this, you can see that this is a hot mess. On the left-hand side are the US government, the places within the US government in which money comes from, the objectives that they're meant to support, and it's over 400 plus programs spread across 13 departments, 10 independent agencies, and 50 offices and sub-agencies. And a key point is that what really happens, because not all of these programs are specifically for rural communities, they're for lots of different kinds of communities, that the eligibility requirements and the scoring criteria and the funding formulas often disadvantage rural, and rural communities get left behind in trying to access this. So just to stop sharing for a moment, what that means is in trying to reach rural areas and trying to provide resources and policy that would be positive for rural areas, there needs to be an intentionality and a targeting that really meets rural communities where they're at, that the resources go for what rural communities need and for what local leadership and local governments and local institutions feel like are important to follow through on their own local strategies. And that is actually what the administration is trying to change, and the American Jobs Plan and what's proposed in the American Jobs Plan is a centerpiece of what they've called potentially historic levels of public investment in rural America. And this commitment to rural is not reflected just in the American Jobs Plan, and even started with executive orders that were created the moment that the administration walked into office. Rural areas and underserved areas are called out in an executive order on both tackling the climate crisis and a lot of the clean energy transition that we've been talking about here today and previous speakers have commented upon, as well as the focus on equity and achieving equity. As Ms. Kendall suggested, the intersection between rural and persistent poverty is significant. Rural communities were the slowest to recover from the 2008 recession. And in fact, even before COVID, still had not recovered their pre-2008 levels of labor force participation or levels of employment. Over 50% of Black Americans that live in rural areas and 45% of Native Americans that live in rural areas are living in distressed rural counties. And so there is an intersection between equity, persistent poverty, and rural that the proposals in the American Jobs Plan are meant to address and redress. A centerpiece of the American Jobs Plan as it relates to rural is a $5 billion proposal for a rural partnership program. This is focused to get money directly to rural regions, including tribal nations, and to help them build on their own unique assets, their own vision for what community and economic development needs to look like, depending on their history, depending on their natural and human capital assets, and depending on the regional and other markets that they're a part of. So it's really to support what I would call the software
rather than the hardware. A lot of the funding that's made available to rural areas is for things like infrastructure. It is for things like broadband, water and sewer, roads. This particular program would focus on people and investing in local leadership, local governments, local institutions, and the planning and relationships and technical expertise and capacity that they would need to follow through on their plans. But the Americans Jobs Plan also has wide-ranging proposals in there specifically focused on rural. As Ms. Kendall stated, there's a $10 billion proposal for rural electric co-ops to transition to clean energy. There's also a $10 billion community revitalization fund to be able to redevelop from old energy to new amenities within local communities. There are proposals for cleaning up abandoned mines and shifting into new kinds of industries in distressed communities. There's $10 billion for regional innovation hubs where rural and urban areas together would benefit. I think the final comment I just would say is their proposals really are evidence of a recognition that there needs to be more strategic focus on the needs and the capacity that's necessary in rural areas and for the types of institutions that serve rural areas well. Much of this money would be able to go directly to nonprofits or to quasi-governmental organizations or even to local governments themselves. And while there's no guarantee that the jobs plan will pass or that all the provisions that are there to benefit rural development would also pass with it, I think there are clear signals that the Biden-Harris administration cares about what happens in rural, even as they focus on their priorities around a transition to cleaner energy, addressing the impacts of climate change, and also addressing equity and ensuring more equitable opportunities as it happens in the nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pippo. I have one question for I'll just put it to both of you. So for the $10 billion program that you both touched on for co-ops to transition to clean energy, could you describe a little bit more how that would operate and what that might look like in practice? Maybe I'll go to Mr. Pippa first and then Ms. Kendall.
I was going to defer to Ms. Kendall.
Oh, okay, we'll go to Ms. Kendall first then. Ms. Kendall.
I think a lot of the details are yet to be worked out because this is a new program. I think what we've been envisioning is using the Department of Agriculture within the Rural Utility Service. There's an existing hardship loan program to make that available to co-ops to have it be forgivable loans for co-ops that can meet certain criteria over time. And so it would be an opt-in program that could have criteria, like a range of different things that could include providing support for workers, providing certain investments that are more desirable, whether that's renewable energy, energy efficiency, electrification, broadband investments. It could be a wide range of the sorts of investments that would be beneficial to local communities. And so I think there's, our approach is to kind of build on the programs that are already in place to make them available for this use that I think that a lot of those will need to be fine-tuned as legislation moves forward.
Thank you, Ms. Kendall. Mr. Pippo, did you want to chime in?
I don't think I have much to add. Again, because it's a new program, there is, design that would be to come, as Ms. Kendall states, and that's true for several of the new proposals that are actually dotted throughout the American Jobs Plan. But as you said, you leverage and learn from existing programs and existing proposals, and I really don't have much to add to what you said on that particular program.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing additional member questions, so I really appreciate Mr. Pippo and Ms. Kendall your time and joining us today and sharing on these important initiatives.
Thanks very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Members, I don't see additional questions, and so I believe folks saw the Rules Committee has put us on the calendar for Thursday. So we will be moving forward with our budget bill on Thursday on the floor. And with that, we are adjourned.